So my passion is to learn about other people's passions, because when someone has a chance to talk about what they're most passionate about, everything about their being becomes brighter, it becomes more real, it becomes more them. And I think that authenticity and that feeling alive and connected and present in the world is a thing I want to surround myself with all of the time. On today's episode, I am talking with the engaging Ethan Brand-LaBarge. If you want to learn more about Ethan, please go to janesplace.com, where you can learn more about him and his favorite comfort food.
Yeah.
Well, let's segue now into what we're calling the confidence series, where my thought on this is, in my experience, when someone is passionate about something and they spend their time on that, it helps build their confidence. And as your confidence builds, you show up in the world in such a strong way.
Sure.
And so much of what we're trying to do with Jane's Place is really kind of help the next generation of leaders kind of find themselves.
Sure.
And one way to do that is to start to explore what your passion is. So to start the conversation, Ethan, what I'd love to know is, what are you most passionate about? And let's kind of go from there.
So over the course of my life, there have been two real stable components that I've always been drawn to. One of them, food and bev, and then the other one, stories, narratives. And ideally, food and bev that tells a story or has a narrative is really what I love. It is one of the most raw expressions of self, I feel like, when you can create something tangible, especially a meal that's intended to be shared, that says something about you. And so the means by which I got to experience this, at least post-undergrad, was through the brewing industry. I made barley soup for a living, effectively, and I really loved it. You know, there was always a story behind a pint, a reason that it was being created. It wasn't just something that, you know, came willy-nilly. There was something that had inspired us, you know, whether it's an ingredient, whether it's an experience, whether it's a person maybe that we had met. And that's usually what drove the recipe creation and the actual execution of the recipe too. And so I have to contextualize things with examples for myself. And maybe one of the best stories that I have that hopefully showcases food and bev and narratives within food and bev is a beer that I brewed. This would have been about a year and a half ago in Rochester, Minnesota. I was tasked with creating a hazy double IPA for this tiny little brewery that I was working for at the time. Any person that knows me knows that I hate two different beer styles more than anything else. It's hazy and it's double IPA. And so I got the pleasure of getting to brew a hazy double here. And so after the shock value of having this task put across my desk subsided, I realized that it was an opportunity for me to explore something that I didn't necessarily like and turn it into something that I enjoyed.
Right.
And so I thought of the most recent experience I had with something that I hated that I then turned to love.
Wow.
And it was moving in with my best friend on planet Earth. Sweet Pete is what we affectionately refer to him as. He has a cat, and I grew up with dogs. And so I could not stand cats all the way through my childhood. I didn't understand them. They had teeth and claws. They scared the heck out of me. And this massive Maine Coon mix, this 35-pound cat, huge, much larger than Earl here, sweet Earl, turned into one of my favorite characters at home. Just super sweet, a total delight, as friendly as they come, and just this big, delicious, fluffy guy. And so we gathered materials to create this really wonderful, fluffy, soft, round, expressive, double hazy IPA. And we affectionately named it Neptune, the name of the cat. And also, I guess kind of a core component that fostered this name Neptune too, outside of just our sweet kitty, was the yeast strain that we used. It was kind of a big risk for us as well. They were developing, they being a yeast manufacturer out of California, what we refer to as a thiolized yeast strain, which is untraditional, or non-traditional rather, for brewers to use. But it unlocks these aromatic precursors that exist on barley. And they create this really wonderful aromatic bouquet in the beer that's just expression beyond what you can get with just the simple kind of dry hopping procedures that brewers had been using prior. And so the yeast strain is called Cosmic Punch, and Neptune kind of felt like it was fitting with the cosmos and also the overarching experience of something that I had hated that I then grew to love, just all dropped into place in that moment. And so any person that came into the brewery that got to try Neptune, you know, that was a little part of me, and certainly a story that tags along with food and bev.
So how, so a couple questions come to mind about
sure,
that. So
yeah.
let me start with Neptune. Was there like a turning point? Like he was on your lap like Earl is?
Yeah,
or like
not too dissimilar from Sweet Earl here. Yeah, well, so Neptune is certainly one of the cats that likes to be on your bed during the evening, but not in like an obtrusive way at all. We'll just hang out at the end of the bed. And also, I mean, he's just so thrilled to see you when you get home. Right. It's vaguely dog-like in that kind of tendency, and so it grows on you. You know, I mean, it's just charming to get home, and you know, notionally we attribute cats as being quite aloof and totally disinterested, and he was the total opposite. Right. And so, yeah, I just loved it more than anything else, and I feel very grateful to have had Neptune as the second roommate during my period in Minnesota.
That's so great. And then the other question that comes to mind is, how did you get into brewing to begin with?
Yeah, we might have to edit this out.
Yeah.
So we got into brewing, we being me, through friends that had the really unwise idea of starting to consider buying a fake ID when we were 19 years old. Very plainly, and that felt like the wrong route to walk for a whole slew of different reasons. But we had access to a homebrew system, and I had always grown up in a family that loved cooking, that loved baking. This was always kind of a central facet to my passions and my joys. You know, the culinary experience, and this felt like a new avenue to explore with that. And so. One summer we brewed our first batch. It was a super simple single hop pale ale. It was not very good. We thought it was great in the time. I'm sure it was oxidized as all get out, and a total stinker for any other person to drink. But for us, you know, we were totally enamored of the process and realized that we wanted to get better steadily and slowly with it. And I was completely hooked with the idea of turning this into something that could be a lot more. I originally was studying political science and Spanish during undergrad with the hopes of going to law school afterwards, and knew that I was going to need to pursue brewing professionally afterwards and just see where that road took me after that.
All right. So at what point so you were going to be a lawyer,
yeah,
and now you're brewing because you know you don't want to have to do the fake IDs so that you can have your own beer.
Yeah.
So
not a great answer, but yeah, I mean it's the honest answer, it's the truthful one.
I love it. So what was kind of the pivot point where you're like, oh wow, this isn't just like something like that. This is like something I really want to do.
Yeah. Like, well, so like most good things, you fall in. Am I allowed to swear?
Of course, yes.
You fall in ass backwards.
Yeah.
And so I had a summer in between my freshman and my sophomore year in undergrad where I was fixated on this idea of working big law and getting my foot in the door and seeing where that took me. And so I'd locked down an internship, a paralegal position with the law firm out of New York City. I was going to be moving to Los Angeles for the summer, working on a case that I was assigned to there. And 3 weeks before the spring semester ended of my freshman year, I get a phone call from the firm, and they say the case that we assigned you to was settled on the final day pre-litigation. And so we no longer have an assignment for you. We know that this might be hard to hear, you know, as we're in the 11th hour. We can find you work. At some stage, we know that you're in the Colorado area. We know that you have family in the Midwest. We can find you something by the end of the week. And I thought about it and said, that's okay. I'll just figure something else out for the summer. And so I went home. I was in eastern Iowa, and I got the really annoying at the time glass half full conversation from my sweet mother saying it's a free summer. You can do whatever you want with it. What would you like to do? And I was really fixated on seeing what it meant to work in a brewery. And so I cold outreached a few different breweries. I said, hey, I've been homebrewing. I really love this. I don't know all that much about it, but I would love to learn more. And one responded to me and said, sure, we'll bring you on as a production associate, which is a nice title for somebody that's cleaning stainless steel and working packaging and bottling and all of that good stuff. And it was just one of the most incredible summers of my life. And I was just totally transfixed by this idea that every single year I could learn a little bit more and be a little bit better and potentially have more responsibility and more impetus on what was being produced and what was being shared in the tap room. And so every year beyond that, I found myself working professionally in beer however I could.
Wow, what surprised you the most that summer, would you say, about the job?
Oh, goodness.
Which is a lot different than going to, be interning for a legal firm, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, it's very hands-on, very blue-collar.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I think that actually touches on it, too. I mean, it's not glamorous at all. I mean, this was during the height of the American craft beer, well, one of the different heights of the American craft beer movement, where we were seeing craft breweries pop up all over the United States, left and right. And, they say that 90% of any job is usually something that you don't necessarily love. And in this case with brewing, 90% of it's just cleaning effectively. Right. And so that was kind of a surprise, but I think also part of what made it so sweet and so special is that there is an intensity, there is a manual labor to it. You work with your hands, you finish dirty and sweaty, covered in mill dust and potentially yeast and hop dust and everything along those lines. And the goal is to produce this beautiful, resplendent, clean pint, that somebody gets to enjoy in the tap room. And so it just has this really fun interplay of being really intense physically, but also having to be very well mapped out cerebrally. You have to plan really, really well and then execute on top of it. And I just love that more than anything else, but it came as a total shock.
What was your evolution of your career in the brewing industry then? So from starting at literally the ground floor, how did you evolve before you decided to come back and get your MBA? Yeah,
so I was working as a production associate intern in Eastern Iowa. I loved it. I found myself working in Colorado Springs at a brewery as well when I was finishing up my undergraduate experience too. Still enjoyed it. I graduated at the start of COVID. I had originally kind of made plans where I was hoping to move out to Singapore and experience international brewing. Singapore, of course, experienced SARS, I believe, in the early 2000s. Yeah. And so they'd seen what this can do, and they shut down their borders pretty quickly. And also, with that, decided to go ahead and be very plain with those applying for work visas and say, we unfortunately can't do this right now. And so it was a similar case of, I'm graduating in 2 months, not unlike when I first started working in brewing when I was 19. I'm graduating in 2 months, and I now no longer have a plan. And so I was picked off to work as an assistant brewer at a spot in Gunnison, Colorado, which for me felt like an awesome fit. I got to stay in a state that I loved. It was a tiny 2-man operation, a 5-barrel brew house, 10-barrel tanks, itty-bitty, small community, hard to reach, very tight-knit. And it felt like kind of the ideal next step after graduation where you're not really sure what the state of the world is going to look like here in a week, a month, or a year. Did that for about a year and change, was pining to return home to the Midwest, was picked off by a brewery that I'd been in love with in Iowa City called Big Grove. They rock, they produce some of the best beer in the country. I'll go ahead and I'll sing their praises from the rooftops. And they were going through a massive period of growth. And so I found myself effectively working as a production brewer there. And so it was very different from small batch brewing, which is where, you brew once, twice a week, and then most everything else is behind the scenes work to make sure that you're moving the beer along and getting things out on time. And of course, 90% is cleaning too, to now all of a sudden we're brewing 4 times a day. And so it's just very different. Now you're focused on the minutia and the small details and conformance of product, and how is it that you can brew the same batch 1,000 times, and regardless of where somebody consumes it, it's going to taste the exact same. They know what they're getting. And I really enjoyed that, but always knew that big brewing wasn't necessarily for me. And so did that for about 2.5 years, found myself in Minnesota, in Rochester, working at another small brewery, effectively operating a brew program out of sweet Rochester, Minnesota, and enjoyed it. But at this stage, we'd started to see the decline of the American craft brew scene, market oversaturated, shrinking, most terrible signs already written on the wall, and so I was faced with questions that went beyond just crafting a really good pint in terms of how you keep a business afloat. Mm-hmm. And I loved these questions, but I didn't feel like I had the business acumen to answer them with any kind of real confidence. And at a small company like that, especially a brewery too, where the beer is the central pillar that everything is held up by, there's a real intensity, there's a real pressure to get it right, because if you get it wrong, it affects the lives of so many different people that, that you love, that you care about, that are teammates of yours. And so that ultimately was the push to then go back to school and pursue an MBA, realizing that I loved those questions, but I just needed help in terms of answering them. And also seeing that the brewing industry, it's going through a period of flux right now. It'll probably never be like it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago in the United States. And that's okay. I loved food and bev, and I loved these kind of commercial questions of operating a business. And so it seemed like the right time to pivot out and explore new avenues.
Well, it's so interesting now that there's so much happening in the non-alcoholic segment, which I think is really, really interesting.
It's awesome.
And a number of, I think, really great beers, from what I understand, that are sort of coming up that are non-alcoholic. Do you have any favorites or experience with that? Sure
do. Yeah. So actually, right here in Boulder, Upslope makes their Upslope craft lager, non-alcoholic. That is just fabulous.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It is so stinking good, and it totally scratches the itch.
Yeah.
When you feel like you'd love a pint, you can crack open one of those, and it works. I mean, it's fabulous, and it's awesome to share with a friend. We actually, just for fun last year, because I was really curious about the non-alcoholic space, I had some friends over, and we blind tested non-alcoholic beers with beers that were full body, full strength, and I was really pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of my friends had a hard time distinguishing between the two.
Really?
And I mean, what a feather in the cap of non-alcoholic brewers.
How about
right?
yourself as a expert?
It tastes, well, you can kind of tell the difference, but that doesn't make it bad at all.
Right.
It tastes like it lacks fermentation quality. Generally speaking, and so it's a bit different, but again, it's a perfectly acceptable substitute. In fact, it's way better than acceptable. It's one that I hope people reach for with more frequency. I think that plenty of breweries are now being pushed to evolve and really develop a strong line of non-alcoholic brews, especially because more people are just not drinking.
Yeah.
The younger generation is just drinking less, which is good. It's certainly positive for people to not poison themselves the same way that we once did. So.
Well, at the beginning of our discussion, you said in addition to brewing that storytelling was another thing that you were super passionate about.
Yeah.
So, and that you are bringing those together in some ways. How did you discover storytelling as something that you care about?
Meals. I mean, that's the quick answer. It's always over a meal. I moved around a lot, not just over the course of the last 5 years, but also just over the course of my adolescence too. And the easiest way to get to know your community was always over a meal. And I also think about one of the more tumultuous periods in my life as well, my boarding school experience, which again I'm incredibly grateful for, and I'm so glad that was how I got to spend a few years as well. But when I think of moments of real comfort during those 4 years that were so unusual for me, I think of how the school that I went to had a real strong policy to make sure that folks engaged over a meal with consistency. So we did what was called sit-down meals. And so 7 meals a week, you were assigned to a random table with 9 students and 1 faculty head. You would be at that table for about 4 to 6 weeks. And it was your break in the action, effectively. During a very busy week, everybody for an hour would sit down for lunch with people that were strangers at the beginning and friends at the end. Wow. And so it's all about storytelling, especially at an environment like that where people come from all walks of life, and so I was just totally enamored of this and realized that was kind of one of the few consistencies, regardless of where I was living, that I was always attracted to.
Was it managed have you ever heard of a Jeffersonian dinner?
Mm-mm. What is this?
So it's just an amazing concept where you think about if you have a group of people that are sitting around a table together, and you're sitting next to me, and then there's people that we're going to just talk to each other.
Sure.
And a Jeffersonian dinner, the concept is you have a table topic.
Oh.
And everybody is involved in that topic. Mm-hmm. And so it isn't having side conversations, it's having a whole discussion around so that reminded me of that, as sort of how you get to know people, that it isn't just the person I'm sitting next to, but it's kind of a guided discussion to some degree. And does that?
So that's a massive point of the sit down meals as well at this boarding school, as well as you are teaching adolescents, right, how to engage and how to bring up topics that everybody can relate to a certain extent as well. And one of the means by which early on that's kind of perpetuated is with the faculty resident. That's the head of the table. Effectively the head. It was a circular table, so there was no head. But yeah, I mean, they kind of showed us the ropes a little bit in terms of how one goes about fostering conversation that every single person can chip into, right? The side-by-side conversation just doesn't really foster relationships the way that we desire. And so not technically Jeffersonian, but very congruent, I would say, in terms of the goal. No question about that. And kind of a tangent as well, one other really nice thing about a meal too is that there's kind of a service element, especially if you're on the provider side of things, which I really love. And that was always a part of things at Deerfield at my boarding school as well too, was one person at the table was assigned to be a first waiter, and then another person at the table was assigned to be a second waiter. And so the first waiter would show up early, they would set the table, they would gather food, they would make sure that everybody was served, and then they would sit down and they would join the meal. And then the second waiter was responsible for clearing the table and getting everything cleaned up before they went to class after lunch. And so that rotated as well, and making sure that for students, they understood the importance and the relevance of not just conversation that we could all engage with, but also serving your peers was just something that was really impactful, I think, for a lot of us at that age.
I love that. One of the things when you and I first met that I was so enamored by was the depth of your questions for me, and how it was just sort of, you always just took something maybe a step deeper than somebody else would have. So the question I have for you, Ethan, is I think a lot of people are so shy and afraid to ask somebody questions that they might feel like might be too personal or might just be digging a little bit too deep. Do you have any kind of personal advice of how you sort of have maybe put yourself out there in that way? Because I think when you ask someone questions that are deep, you're actually also giving up a part of yourself in a way. So do you mind just kind of talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wish that I had an answer that I felt confident in to that question. I think it really just has to do with, and maybe it's selfish as well, hoping that this person can help you through your own personal confusion, that maybe you can learn something from them that clarifies something that you've been struggling with. I mean, it's part of the reason that I enjoyed speaking with you over the course of this past year is because I always walked away feeling like at worst there was some light shed on a topic that now I can feel a little bit more familiar with. Right. And I'm not completely understanding it. I don't think that that's ever the expectation, but at least we know a little bit more about it or where to go about asking future questions. As far as having the courage to ask questions, it's tough to cultivate. I don't think that people look at those that ask questions as stupid though these days, right. or as, especially in a commercial setting, in a professional setting, as maybe even rebellious if you ask questions at times too. I think that folks just appreciate that you're engaged, that you're curious, that you care about something, that you're not static, that you expect that you can be more than you currently are, but it just takes the help of somebody else that's kind of been there or done that, or maybe is willing to tweak your question a little bit and point you in the right direction.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me about dialogues, because I think having been a mentor for so many years, the thing that continues to surprise people is how much you can learn as a mentor, even more so than the person that you think you might be mentoring. And so I think having these sort of dialogues where maybe it does feel a little rebellious or a little bit, ooh, wow, that takes some courage to ask that. Sure. But then it's so much more intriguing for the person who's on the other end of it, which is to actually be in an intelligent dialogue. And I know for myself, I think I just want to learn all the time. And it's just kind of like when you open yourself up to questions that are maybe a little uncomfortable, or maybe just not the average question that somebody would ask, it just sort of feels like it just brings out, for me, even more of who I want to be, which is an interesting person myself.
Yeah. Do you experience this, today with folk as well, where there's something that you're really curious about, but you feel a little twinge of nervousness, in how you go about asking the question, or if it's going to be received well, if you'll get the answer that you want. I mean, you've certainly got a wealth of experience at this stage, and your feet firmly underneath you, and you know so much about so many different things. When it comes to these sorts of questions, does that kind of persist, or do you just get better at it with time? That nervousness kind of fades.
I think you get better at it over time, I would say. I think that's fair. It's just, I always kind of think about life as like we have a library, and where you're at in your life, you've got like 10 books, and I've got 20,000 books or something. Just because you just have that many more experiences. So I think almost like with anything, it becomes a little bit better. But I also think there's that sense that if you don't have a little queasiness about it, then you're not actually pushing yourself enough to some degree.
Do you ever feel like you're fixated on trying to ask the perfect question? Or do you let yourself kind of shoot from the hip sometimes with people?
I'm totally shoot from the hip.
Okay.
I wish I could say I was the perfect question. I never know what I'm going to ask or what's going to happen. I mean, it really is just totally ad lib all the time.
Well, and I wonder if that's maybe what makes it easier for somebody on the receiving end of said question to answer too, is they can recognize that there's authenticity. It's not an overly curated question that's been put through its paces time and time again so that the syntax is spot on, so that the subject and predicate are so particular. This is just what your heart says I need to ask about right now.
Yes.
Can you engage with that, you know? And it's hard to build the airplane as you fly it in these sorts of contexts. I can only imagine.
And no, it's literally my passion has become doing this, and just thank you for your time this afternoon and for keeping Earl occupied.
The easiest job of them all. No question about that.
This is great. When Christy Rugen, the Associate Dean of the MBA program at the University of Colorado, asked me if I had time to meet Ethan, of course I said yes. I assumed this would be a one-off meeting and we would both go on to our merry ways. But in our discussion, I was so taken aback by Ethan's quiet confidence, his intellectual curiosity, and his deeply intriguing questions that I was very anxious to have him join my podcast. In this discussion, he continued to engage in a way that made me want to ask the next question of him. I knew I was talking to an old soul in a young person's body. I loved his story about Neptune the cat and the beer named after him, and how one can come to love something that they thought they hated. And in the same vein, how do we try to learn more and get better every year in our lives? And although Ethan didn't say this, I will add this. How do we compare ourselves only to ourselves and not to others? So my conversation with Ethan has brought up these questions for us. First, can we be stuck with a belief that is so ingrained and yet really is not valid if we are open to learning and experiencing? And second, how do we approach always trying to get better than we were before? Special thanks to Jane's Place fabulous producer, Aditi Joshi, who made my passion a reality. I am also so appreciative that the amazing musician, Tim Cook, provided the lively music from the Subdudes called Them Figs. This podcast was brought to you by Rudy's Bakery new gluten-free Sandos with Justin's Nut Butter and from our friends at Naturally Colorado. I want to keep asking questions that matter, and I want this to feel like a space where your story belongs too. If there's something you want to talk about, a moment, a memory, a shift you're going through, Jane's Place door is always open. Truly. You can drop me a note on the website, join a future episode, or simply listen in when you're ready. Because Jane's Place isn't just a podcast, it's a gathering. And I'm so grateful that you're here.